Hey everyone, as we continue through our review of Unit 4 for biology, we started Unit 4 with our last video, which was all about photosynthesis. And so our next topic is going to be a process called cellular respiration, which is the exact opposite of photosynthesis. So let's start off by looking at this diagram here. So we learned in our last lesson that sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water come together to perform photosynthesis. The plant does photosynthesis with sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. And as a result, the plant produces glucose, or sugar, in other words, and oxygen. Okay, so we know that plants do this process all the time, but plants also need glucose for energy. So let's look at how that glucose that the plants make is broken down to produce the energy that plants and animals and humans need. Okay, so the process that plants make glucose during photosynthesis. And not only do they make glucose, but they also make oxygen in this process. So what does the plant do with this glucose that they make? Well, the plant uses glucose for energy for itself and stores some for later use or for animals and humans to use for food. Okay, so animals and people get glucose by eating plants. Okay, so plants make the glucose during photosynthesis, and it's a little bigger. And plants, during photosynthesis, plants make the glucose and the oxygen that animals and humans need. The plants use some of the glucose for their own energy, and then they store the rest of it so that they can use it later, or so that animals and humans can eat the plants and get the energy that they need as well. Okay, so breaking down that glucose to release energy is done through a process known as cellular respiration. And interestingly, it is the exact opposite of photosynthesis. So let's look a little more in depth in cellular respiration. So unlike photosynthesis, cellular respiration is a process that is done by both plants and animals. We know that only plants can do photosynthesis, but plants and animals can do cellular respiration. And that is where that takes the glucose and turns it into usable energy for the plants and the animals that eat the glucose. So let's look at this information and answer a few key questions. So have you ever wondered how your body gets energy from the food you eat? Food is your body's only source of energy. Your food has to be digested, and the energy must be converted into a form that our body can use. The process of getting energy from the food you eat is called cellular respiration. Okay, so the process, I need to make this a little bigger. So the cells make energy through the process called cellular respiration. And so when you eat, the molecules of food are too large and complex for your cells to use. So your body has to perform a few complex chemical reactions in order to break down your food. The majority of your food is broken down into glucose, which your cells can then use through cellular respiration to convert the stored chemical energy into a molecule called ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate and carries the energy that is usable for cells such as muscles and neurons. So the name of the molecule that carries energy that is released from your food is ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so there are two basic steps in cellular respiration. The first step occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, and it does not require oxygen. So this is called anaerobic cellular respiration because it does not require oxygen. There are organisms, single-celled organisms like yeast, that get all the energy they need from just doing this first step, and they don't need oxygen to do it. And so that's why yeast are used in baking, because they can get energy through this anaerobic respiration. And yeast are living organisms, in case you're wondering. And they do cellular respiration in an anaerobic state, so that means without oxygen. In other organisms, the remaining steps of cellular respiration occur in the mitochondria. And you may remember the mitochondria from learning about the cell. So here's your animal cell, here's your plant cell. Let me zoom in a little bit on this. So animal cell, plant cell, and the mitochondria are these little peanut-shaped organelles that are found all throughout the cell. And if you blew them up big, this is what they would look like. And this is where most of the cellular respiration takes place. And in the mitochondria, oxygen is required, okay? And ATP is produced. So the glucose comes into the mitochondria, the oxygen comes into the mitochondria, and then ATP is released. Also released is CO2, carbon dioxide, and water. So this is why we exhale carbon dioxide, because when the glucose is broken down with the oxygen inside these mitochondria, carbon dioxide and water are released. And so we breathe out carbon dioxide because of this process. We also release water through sweat and in our breath sometimes, and in our urine. So where in the cell does most of cellular respiration happen? Well, that's in the mighty mitochondria. And remember, when we learned about all the different organelles in the cell, we learned that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And so that's why I call it the mighty mitochondria. And that means that that's where the energy for the cell is created. And energy is created by breaking down the glucose that you get from your food. Okay. So what else is required for cellular respiration besides glucose? Well, we saw right here, we need some oxygen as well to make this happen. So glucose and oxygen are required for cellular respiration to take place. So we know that plants and animals do cellular respiration, and they have mitochondria in their cells, just like animals and humans have mitochondria in their cells. So plants store the glucose made from photosynthesis during the spring and summer months to provide energy for their cells during the fall and the winter. similar to like how a bear eats a lot in the summer and fall in preparation for hibernation in the winter. So plants basically hibernate through the winter. They lose their leaves, and so they can't do photosynthesis without their leaves. And so they store a lot of the glucose that they make in the spring and the summer so that they can survive in the fall and the winter. Humans and other animals use ATP to give their muscles energy. So that's how we move. We need energy in our muscles in order to move. And we need more energy at certain times, like when we're growing or when we're exercising. And when you exercise, your muscles need a lot more energy. And so when you exercise, your breathing increases, and that allows you to take in more oxygen. And that increases cellular respiration in your body so that you can get more energy. Since we're taking in more oxygen because we're breathing more, we're also releasing more carbon dioxide. So this process of breathing in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide is part of cellular respiration. It is responsible for helping us move. It also is responsible for helping us maintain our internal body temperature. Remember, we talked about homeostasis, and our body likes to stay at a stable internal body temperature. And so these two processes are involved in that. Your body warms up because your cells are using the energy created from cellular respiration in order to move when we exercise. And this generates heat. And this is why in times of increased cellular respiration, like when we're exercising, our body temperature increases even more. So let's look at these diagrams here. This is photosynthesis depicted in a drawing. So you've got carbon dioxide, which is one carbon, that little gray sphere is the carbon, and two oxygens. So the green spheres are the oxygen. Combines with water in the presence of light to produce glucose and oxygen, okay? And so only plants do photosynthesis. And so plants and animals, see here, plants and animals do cellular respiration. So in cellular respiration, the oxygen and the sugar that was produced over here in photosynthesis combine, and they recombine and break down into carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. So what three molecules are made from the process of cellular respiration? So if you look at the diagram, it shows you, remember, the products are on the right side of the arrow. So the products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So carbon dioxide, water, and ATP energy. So what do we use ATP for? Well, for movement. Well, let's be more clear. Used by our muscles for movement and exercise. And growth. Let's not forget about that. Okay. So let's compare these two processes, cellular respiration and photosynthesis. And if you'll recall, when I first started this lesson, I said they're the opposite. And so if you start up here with photosynthesis, the green is photosynthesis. So it takes place in the chloroplast, in the leaves of the plant. And so light energy and CO2 and water go into the chloroplast. Photosynthesis occurs, and glucose and oxygen are produced. Okay, now this glucose and oxygen go into the mitochondria and cellular respiration occurs. The mitochondria releases chemical energy in the form of ATP, and it also releases carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide and water go back into the atmosphere and into the ground, and the plant uses them with light energy to do photosynthesis. So see how they're connected? It is a circle or a cycle that never ends. And so one process depends on the other. Okay, so let's break it down here. So photosynthesis. Photosynthesis occurs only in plants, but cellular respiration occurs in both plants and animals / humans. So humans are counted in with the animals. We are in the animal kingdom. So where does it happen? Well, photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast, and cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. So what is required, or what are the inputs, also called the reactants of photosynthesis? Well, photosynthesis needs carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight, which is a form of energy. What are the inputs for cellular respiration? Well, cellular respiration requires two things, which is glucose and oxygen. Okay. Now let's look at the outputs. The outputs of photosynthesis are glucose. I'm going to make these red so you can see them better, the difference. Are glucose, oops. Sorry, in the right spot. Glucose and oxygen. And the outputs for cellular respiration, and I'm hoping you're seeing a pattern here, are carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. Okay. So look at that. The inputs for photosynthesis are the same as the outputs for cellular respiration. And so remember, inputs are also called reactants, and outputs are also called products. Okay. So the inputs or the reactants of photosynthesis are the same as the outputs or the products of cellular respiration. And likewise, the inputs for cellular respiration are the same as the outputs or reactants for photosynthesis. So when you look up here, you see how cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide and water, which photosynthesis requires with light energy, and photosynthesis produces glucose and oxygen, which cellular respiration requires. It's a cycle that never ends. All right, now the energy involved with photosynthesis comes from the sun. sunlight. But the energy that is produced in cellular respiration is chemical energy in the form of ATP. Okay, that's it for cellular respiration. Thank you for your attention.